smartphone manufacturers like to talk on and on and on about is their cameras, right? They go on and on every single year talking about every minor improvement that they made to their camera systems. They throw a lot of technical jargon too. They start talking about stuff like aperture, ISO, shutter speed, etc. The problem with that is that most consumers don't understand that jargon, and therefore they don't really know what kind of camera system they're getting into when they're buying a phone. This video is here to fix it. In this video, not only will you learn everything you need to know to make sure that when you buy a phone for the cameras, you know exactly what to look out for, but also it'll make you be able to take good use of the cameras that you already have on your phone. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now your phone has multiple cameras, but a typical DSLR or mirrorless camera has only one. And there's actually a very good reason for it. Now take this camera. If I wanted to attach a zoom lens, I will take a zoom lens like the one I have over here, and I will just attach it. But let's say that I didn't want a zoom lens. I wanted an ultra-wide lens or a macro lens. Then I can buy a macro lens and then attach that macro lens to my camera. So why don't phones have this? Well, very few people are going to want to carry around lens kits. Like, can you imagine if you wanted to take a photograph on your phone, you had to fiddle around with the button, you had to take the lens out, and then you had to reach into your briefcase in your bag and then open that up and then read the labels and carefully select the lens that you wanted and then attach it and then take a photograph? Yeah, not many people are going to do that. So because of that, smartphone manufacturers just started including multiple cameras on their phones. And this is how phones achieve lens swapping. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into these cameras. So a thing that you hear a lot when smartphone manufacturers talk about cameras, one of the main terms of technical jargon that you hear is zoom. But some people understand zoom to a certain extent. Phone manufacturers just love to talk about zoom. Samsung constantly talks about their their 100 times space zoom capabilities. Questionable marketing terms aside, you get the point. And Samsung is not the only companies that are doing this. Multiple other companies do this too. They talk about zoom a lot, and the consumers are also interested in it. But to understand what they mean by zoom, we first need to understand the word itself. So zoom is basically when you take an object, like if you have a photograph and I am the subject of the photograph, you kind of see less of the background if you zoom in on me, the subject. To give you an idea of what that looks like, there we go. That's zoom. And well, there are two ways of achieving this zoom. What I just did is called digital zoom because my camera doesn't have a zoom lens installed. It's DJI. And digital zoom is basically when you take an image and then you cut the corners, cut the top, bottom, side, and the two sides of the image, and then you enlarge in the image that you already have. And this is alright, it gets the purpose done. You see less of the background and the main subject is larger. But the only issue with that is you start to see a degradation of quality. And to give you an example of what I mean by this, look at this simple yet fun thing that you can do on Scratch. So as you can see with our dragon here, if I press the space button, I can make it more and more pixelated. So what's actually happening is I'm reducing the number of pixels that are available to represent this dragon until eventually you have only 4 or so pixels to represent the dragon. And when I increase the number of pixels to represent the dragon, you can see the dragon more clearly. And well, this is basically the same thing with digital zoom. When you're zooming in like that, you're reducing the amount of pixels on screen, and therefore you get a worse quality image. If you want to zoom without taking heed to image quality, then you should use optical zoom. So this is a traditional mirrorless camera, right? And this thing I have attached here is not actually the camera itself, but rather it's the lens. Now you can see that I can pop this lens off, and this is our sensor. Now when I put this lens in here, what's actually happening is that I am creating distance between the lens and the sensor. And now when I turn the slider on this lens to change the zoom levels, I'm changing the distance between the lens and the sensor. And when you change the distance between the lens and the sensor, you get optical zoom. Optical zoom is better than digital zoom because you don't lose quality. But smartphones don't work like that. The zoom camera on your phone isn't advertised as 5x to 10x, it's just 5x or it's 10x, right? And there's actually a really good reason for this, and this leads me on to an important point I want to make. You see, this is a zoom lens. It allows you to change the zoom level that you have, and you'll see that when I attach my camera to it. And you saw that in the previous clip too. See, it can change the distance between the lens and the sensor. But what you have on your phone is not really a zoom lens, it's a telephoto lens. Now stick with me, but a telephoto lens is basically like a zoom lens frozen in time. Instead of the zoom lens I have on the camera, which I can move however much I want, the lens on your phone is in a fixed position. And this means that it's only stuck at 3x zoom. Now with this I can go from 3x to 5x, let's just say. But on my phone I am stuck at 3x. Now you might be wondering, that's not true because I can zoom in. It's not like I have to choose between the different zoom levels, I can just pinch and zoom in. This is actually your phone being incredibly clever. So what it does is, let's say that in your phone setup you have a ultra-wide camera 0.5x, a main camera 1x, a zoom camera, let's say that's at 3x, and a secondary zoom camera at 5x. So you start at the ultra-wide camera, and the quality is alright because you're actually relying on camera optics. But then you zoom in, and as you zoom in, you're not zooming in the sense that this is zooming in with your lens, you're manipulating the camera optics, but instead you're actually using digital zoom. And you use digital zoom until you hit the 1x mark, because this is when your phone switches from your ultra-wide camera to your main camera. And generally your main camera will be of higher quality, so because of that you will tend to notice the quality degradation as you zoom in go less and less. And then eventually when you hit 3 times, your phone will switch over to its first zoom camera, and then the quality will go back up again. And then quality will degrade faster than it did with the 1x because the 1x zoom camera was a better sensor nonetheless. And then the quality will continue to degrade until you hit your 5x, where your secondary zoom camera will kick in, and then your quality will be back up again. So phone cameras blend in digital zoom and optical zoom to create a very nice user-friendly camera experience, and it takes a lot of work, so we have to commemorate the effort. So now you might be wondering why I compared the Sony camera in millimeters while I talked about the zoom on the phones in 1 times, 2 times, 3 times. Well, the millimeter number that I just told you, you can think of it as the focal length. The focal length is basically a universal method of measuring zoom. Now to give you an idea of what I mean, if I take these 2 phones, 1 time zoom on these 2 phones are 2 completely different things, and here's some photos for your proof. But if you take the focal length of these 2 phones cameras, then you can know for sure that both of them are actually zooming in the same level. So focal length is just a universal method of measuring zoom, and it's what the professionals use. And this method actually allows for fair comparison between 2 different devices. And now 1 time zoom on 1 camera system means something completely different to 1 time zoom on a different camera system. To give you an example, the iPhone 16 Pro Max's 1 time zoom camera, also known as the main camera, it has a focal length of 24mm, while the S25 Ultra's one has a focal length of 23mm. Yeah, it's a small difference, but that small difference counts, and those differences get much larger when you're talking about different devices and camera systems, like a traditional camera and a phone. So with that out of the way, we've completely covered zoom. Now let's talk about aperture. So put it simply, aperture is how much light your phone camera lets in, or any camera really. So we're Sri Lankans, so we can't see this, but in other countries where people have different eye tones, you can see their pupils. And if you've met someone like this, you probably have, and you've gone outside with them, you notice that when you're outside, their pupils tend to be smaller. They constrict, and then when you're inside, their pupils dilate. This is actually extremely important for the eyeball to function. So when there's too much light, your pupils constrict themselves, and the reason why they do this is to let in less light. That's the exact same way that cameras affect their aperture as well. They let in less light, and then they let in less light when there's too much light, and then they let in more light during the night time. Now, traditional cameras, they have auto modes, but then if you want to, you can dive into the settings and adjust this yourself. And if you want to adjust this yourself, which you can also do in most smartphones, you have to understand how this thing is measured. Aperture is measured in f-stops. So it goes like f1.8, f5.6, etc., etc. And these f-stops, they're actually a bit tricky to understand, so you have to hang on for a second. If the f value is low, for example, it's f1.8, then your aperture is actually wide, not narrow. And when your aperture is wide, you let in more light. And you also have a shallower depth of field. That means that if I have this camera with a wide aperture setting and I take a photo of my hand as a subject, if I have an extremely wide aperture, the background would be blurred and this would be the main subject. Without any software tricks, it's pure optics. And this has now widely regarded as being a symbol of quality in cameras, and it gives that aesthetic effect which people like. Now, you can also have the f value go way up to like f5.6 all the way to f30 on this camera at least. So when that happens, you have a narrow aperture and a better depth of field. And this means that when you're taking an expansive scenery with a bunch of trees all different depths to each other and a skyline in the background, if you have a narrow aperture, you can get to see all of it, every single detail, and none of it will be blurred. But if you have a wide aperture, you'd see the closest trees next to you and the rest will be blurred. So, understanding aperture is key to understanding what you want in your phone's camera system and in any other camera in general, and would also allow you to get better shots out of your phone's camera. Mind though that as you do decrease your aperture and make it narrower, you let in less light to your camera, and that means that some pixels don't get the light information that they need to represent color, and they just end up as grain. So you might want to avoid that. Now, most smartphone cameras have very wide apertures, especially the main camera, and there's actually a really good reason for this. People like that aesthetic blurring effect of the background, and so wide apertures are what companies tend to focus on. Also, they let in more light, which allows a phone to perform amazingly in night, which is something that people look out for as well. They want phones that have a good night mode so that they can capture scenes at night. But something interesting that you tend to realize is that with the telephoto camera, which is the zoom camera but not the zoom camera like we talked about a little while back, and the ultra-wide cameras, they actually have narrow apertures. And this is because of the fact that when people take an expansive scenery, they want to see everything. They don't want some natural background blur to ruin it. Now, aperture is not fixed, mind you. It's not like the case where on a traditional camera you can adjust it, and on a telephoto camera on a phone you can't. No, you can adjust the aperture on this. And if you want to on the iPhone, in the portrait mode section, you can actually adjust the aperture as well to adjust the intensity of the background blur. But most phone cameras can do this adjusting automatically, so it's not really something that you have to be too concerned about. But if you want to dive deep, you can do it. Obviously, when we're talking about the actual output of a camera, the quality depends largely on the sensor size, but that's common knowledge at this point, so I didn't really include it that much in this video. But we talked a little bit about this in our previous video about the Samsung S25 Ultra. So if you want, you can go check that video out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and of course, if you want more tech content like this, please consider subscribing. Check out our website and our podcast, which link will be in the description down below. Have a nice day.